Hello, and welcome to the Respectability webinar, Campaign 2014, Results of the New Bipartisan Poll of Voters with and Without Disabilities on Disability Issues. Your moderator for today's program is Jennifer Laszlo Mizrahi, President of Respectability. Your speakers for today's program are Dr. Whit, Ayres, a Republican, and Dr. Stan Greenberg, a Democrat. Audiocast quality is subject to your equipment, available bandwidth, and Internet traffic. If you experience unsatisfactory audio quality, please use the telephone dial-in option provided in your confirmation and reminder emails. If you have dialed in, operator assistance is available by pressing #. You may send questions at any time by using the chat window located to the lower left corner of the presentation screen. A question and answer session will follow the presentation. I'll now turn the call over to our moderator. Jennifer, please begin.
Thank you all for joining us today. We're delighted to have you with us for Campaign 2014, and we're particularly delighted to have such extraordinary speakers. Republican Whit, Ayres, PhD, is a leading Washington, D.C. political consultant with over 30 years of experience in polling and survey research for high-profile political campaigns and associations. His firm is the North Star Opinion Research. It's a national public opinion and public affairs firm here locally in the Washington area. He has many important clients, including Senators Mark Rubio, Lamar Alexander, Bob Corker, Lindsey Graham, Tennessee Governor Bill Haslam, and others. He's very active in the American Association of Political Consultants, where he plays a very important leadership role. We also have Stanley Greenberg, who is a Democratic political consultant, perhaps the leading one in the world. He has served as polling advisor to presidents and prime ministers, CEOs, and dozens of tough campaigns in the United States and around the world, including for President Bill Clinton and Vice President Al Gore, British Prime Minister Tony Blair, President Nelson Mandela, as well as the national leaders in Israel, Europe, and Latin America. His corporate clients include many of the big-name companies that you've heard of. He also does bipartisan polls for NPR, the LA Times, and the Bi-Partisan Policy Center. I also want to thank Dave Walker, who's played a key role in this work. This is a bipartisan poll, and Respectability is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We have very interesting data to go through, and we will have a chance for Q&A. So let's start with Whit, Ayres.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank all of you for joining us. This is another in a series of bipartisan surveys that North Star Opinion Research has done with Greenberg, Quinlan, Rosner. And you will see here what we've found before, and that is that voters with disabilities, and even more importantly, family members with disabilities, and close friends of people with disabilities constitute a very significant chunk of the electorate. And when you talk about issues affecting people with disabilities, you really get their attention. Speaking as someone who is in a family where a family member has a serious disability, I will tell you that when people talk about issues that they are facing, it gets not only their attention, but the attention of all of their friends and all of their family members. So I hope you'll enjoy some of the data that we have here from the people who actually voted in the 2014 election. Stan, I'll let you talk, and then we'll turn over to Dave.
Indeed. Thank you. This is Stan Greenberg. Thank you to Respectability for being so aggressive in putting this issue before the country and the voters, and this assessment of what happened in the election related to disabilities. There's no doubt about the seriousness of this community and the potential for those who are making public policy and those who are trying to be politically attentive. This community matters, and as reflected in this data. They were very attentive in this election to where these issues were raised, but they clearly wanted to hear much more, on these issues. But the potential is very real, and you'll see the spikes that appear, in the survey. that are signaled to elected officials that acknowledging these issues and moving ahead with policy prescriptions can be politically effective. And hopefully this survey will become part of that discussion. So let me turn it over to Dave Walker, who has supervised this work brilliantly from the side of Greenberg, Quinlan, and Rosner. Okay.
Well, hello, everyone. Again, this is David Walker. I work with Stan Greenberg at Greenberg, Quinlan, Rosner, and it was our honor and pleasure to work with North Star, Whit's outfit, in producing this work. I'm going to go through the slides. I have been accused often of mumbling in presentations. If that is a problem, I'm sure Jennifer or someone will give me a signal to say stop mumbling. Like Whit, I'm also, I have a family member, a son with a significant disability. So this is, for us, it's more than politics. It's something we live with every day, and it's a great pleasure to work for this organization. So I'm going to move through these slides. Just briefly, I'm going to tell you this is part of a national post-election survey. We interviewed 2014 voters, which is to say people who did participate in the recent election. There are a total of 1,030 interviews in this data set. And the margin of error is around 3 points, give or take. The survey was weighted to exit surveys as well. It might be weighted again once the exits, and there's a continual process of weighting and reweighting, but it's fairly close to what actually happened. The first survey, and this is something Whit alluded to earlier, the disability community, or the people we define as a disability community, is very, very big. That's a polling term, but 4 in 10 2010 voters say they are either personally affected, which is to say they describe themselves as having a disability. They have a family member who has a disability at 23%, or a close friend who has a disability as well. When you think about that number, nearly 40%, it's higher than say white non-college voters, or white seniors, or even seniors overall, higher than Hispanic voters or African American voters. I mean, it is in a lot of the unmarried. I mean, all the groups that are talked about in post-election analysis, this group is bigger, can have a bigger impact. And it's actually rare that anyone will look and see how they voted. The other thing about this community is that, and particularly among people who describe themselves as personally disabled, they are more attentive. They said this was not a huge turnout election. A lot of states, the turnout was significantly lower, even compared to 2010. For just one example, in Pennsylvania, they had 600,000 fewer voters than 4 years ago. Minnesota set a record for low turnout as well. This is an electorate that it was a little bit countercyclical, particularly when you look at people who say they are, who describe themselves as having a disability. And it's conjecture, but these are people who have, at least in their own minds, they have a significant stake in decisions that are made in state capitals and national capitals. So this matters to them in a very profound way, maybe even a little bit more than is the case with other groups. The other the people with disabilities and disability community as a whole also share the frustration of the rest of the country with the direction of things. They're in no way atypical, and in fact, if you look at people with a personal disability, they're even more cynical about the direction of things. We asked everyone in the survey, and we asked people in the disability community as well, do you approve, disapprove of the president? The president's numbers overall, he's underwater by about 12 points. If you look at people with personal disability, the president does a little bit better. In part, that reflects partisan bias. People who are struggling with a personal disability are a little bit are more democratic than average. I think that probably reflects that. But if you look at the overall disability community, again, this includes people with who describe themselves as disability, as having a disability, have a family member with a disability, or friends or close friends with someone with a disability. They look pretty much like the rest of the country when it comes to the president. So how did they vote? If you look at the Senate races, and this is, and I'll show you this slide next. We also have a time series slides. If you look at the Senate race, it's a fairly divided community. It's arguably swing. Again, there's a significant Democratic margin among people with a personal disability, not shared. In fact, Republicans did quite well among friends and family members. So the overall result, at least in the Senate race, where Republicans won nationally, at least in a survey, and this is just among battleground, just so you know, it's all the contested races. Nationally, they won by 3 points in the battleground. In the disability community, they won by 6 points. So when you net everything out, it doesn't look that much different than the rest of the country. You see the same pattern in the House races. This is national data. People with personal disability, Democrats won that vote by 12 points. But the overall disability community, Republicans actually won and actually did significantly better in House races than they did they did overall. So there is a very big swing element here. Last September, we fielded a survey of in the Senate battleground and showed results. This slide is a time series with those data. And as you'll see, compared to September, and this is just the battleground, just to remind everyone, the battleground was a battleground that favored the Republicans this year. A lot of Romney states, that was reflected in the survey in September. That was reflected in the outcome in November. And it's certainly reflected in this survey. There was a small surge, a Republican surge. In the overall disability community. Again, this includes everyone, from people, friends, family, and self. The other thing that was interesting is their agenda. If you look at voters overall, this was very much an economy election. By 24 points overall, voters were saying the economy was the most important issue that they used to decide whom to support. And if you look specifically at the disability community, the same pattern. In fact, it's even higher. Not quite beyond margin of error, but very close. And other research we've done, it should come to the surprise of no one. The disability community as a whole, and particularly individuals with disability, are struggling economically, for a variety of reasons. Some obvious, some less so. So the economy is even more critical to this group than voters overall. And again, this election really turned on the economy. This next slide. We asked people overall. This is we asked everyone in a survey whether the president and the political debate in this country were raising issues that were important to them, and whether they're just not dealing with issues that matter to people. The country overall, did not believe their issues were addressed by nearly 2-to-1 margin. That sentiment is reflected almost within a point among the disability community. And then we were more specific, and we asked people, and I'm going to read this question because it's important we all hear it. We asked people, thinking about issues in the contested campaigns in your state, would you say that the candidates put forward specific serious policies to improve opportunities for people with disabilities, or did candidates not put forward any serious policies on those issues? Overall, nationally, voters did not hear much on these issues, 22%. I think that's pretty fair. Having watching these races, it was relatively rare to hear anyone give voice to people with disabilities. There was some dialogue around veterans and some of the issues that the veterans are going through in the VA and so forth. I suspect that 22% is reflective of that debate. But the one thing I want to highlight is the number. Let's see if it'll work. Yeah, the number here. This is these are people with who have who are self-ascribed as having a disability. They certainly have a much bigger ear by huge numbers, 16 points for these issues and for candidates raising these issues than voters overall. The other issue too, and this is something we saw again in September. This issue has, or the issue of helping people with disabilities, and particularly with jobs and allowing them to to work, has enormous power. And I would argue that there was missed opportunity by both sides not to give more voice to this issue than was in fact happened. What you have in this slide are two measures. One, we asked everyone, we asked people who had heard some candidates speak to this issue, what kind of an impact it had, and 78% said it had a impact, and 36% said it had a major impact. Again, if you look at people with personal disabilities, huge impact. 76% were saying it had a major impact, and how they voted. And then we also asked them, whether it had an impact or not, if it was made them more likely to support or less likely to support. And it's very, it's clearly one-sided, 83% to 9% overall. Again, if you look at people with personal disabilities, it's 92 to 7. And the disability community in a whole, also had a disproportionate impact at 82% overall, 43% major impact, and certainly had influence in how they voted. This is a question we asked anyone. And we just asked them simply, is this something you're interested in? Would you have wanted to hear more about hear more from the candidates about policies to expand opportunities for people with disabilities? 2 to 1. It's very one-sided. 65%, 31% overall, and not surprisingly, higher among people who are struggling with a disability. And this is the last slide. We asked people, thinking about the election, do you think voting was fully accessible to people with disabilities, or are some people with disabilities unable to vote due to inaccessibility? Again, it's not an issue that most people follow. I will note again that people who are struggling with personal disability are more likely to see a problem with the franchise and with access to the franchise. It's 6 points. It's not a huge change, but it is, a notable change. So that is, I think that's the end of the deck, and I think we will open it up to questions.
Dan and Whit, what do you think are the most important findings from this deck?
For me, when I look at it, is that first I pay attention to the fact that those with personal disabilities are more likely to vote for candidates, which I think they're voting Democratic, but I think it's probably because of recognition of need related to disability, so that there appears to be some translation in vote, which I think is an important concept to establish in the research. But bottom line, the most important was that I think attentiveness. I was surprised by the percentage of people who said they've heard people addressing that issue, and when they did hear it, it had an enormous impact, on their vote. So we have, at an individual level, some translation of it into voting, very attentive ear to leaders, candidates, beginning to speak to it, evidence that translates into real impact. And then this very large number, who say that they would have been interested on hearing more from candidates, and that 2/3 number, 2-to-1 number, those were a powerful, message to take forward.
I agree with what Stan said completely. We all know that the political messages that penetrate most effectively are those that affect us personally and directly. And you see that very clearly in slide 14, where people who are affected by disabilities or whose family members are affected by disabilities hear any message that directly affects them and the person with the disability. So the two takeaways to me from this deck are, first of all, the size of the disability community. You're talking 4 out of 10 voters here overall when you define it as family members and friends as well as people who are disabled, coupled with the fact that messages that relate to a disability really penetrate to these people.
So why do you think it is that the campaign did so little to use any disability issues in their communication strategy? And what do you think it'll take between now and 2016 to ensure that those issues are considered and put forth in future campaigns?
Part of it, I think, is lack of awareness of both the size of the disability community and its potential political impact. Part of it, I think, is probably a sense that the issues for people with disabilities are specific to their particular disability, so that people with vision problems have different issues than people who have hearing problems and people who have mobility problems. But there's still ways to cut across those various disabilities, I think, and I think it's a matter of politicians, first of all, being aware of it, and second, figuring out how to message to the entire disability community.
Thank you. Stan, what do you feel are the key things to getting candidates to start to focus more on these issues, given what you both talked about in terms of the large size of this population and the deep interest that they have in these issues?
I would start very early with the educating all of the campaigns that are starting up for 2016. Whether that's presidential level, and I think it is a presidential level issue. And we'll probably get more traction as they begin to recognize the community, the issue, and I think it's an opportunity. It's bipartisan, it's non-ideological, but there's no doubt that people are attentive, and so I think you start soon with education, of all those who are beginning to think about running for president.
Thank you. Operator, do we have questions from the phone lines, or are there questions that are online that are showing?
Currently no questions, but if you have dialed in and would you like to queue up for questions, please press 7 and the pound sign on your phone now.
So, operator, if you can repeat one more time how people can ask a question.
To ask a verbal question, you may press 7# on your telephone now to queue up for verbal questions or submit your questions via the chat window.
I think our speakers are so very clear in the data that it sounds like there aren't questions. I just want to say how much I appreciate the opportunity to work with some of America's top pollsters on this issue. This is, for respectability, an incredibly important topic because if we do want to empower Americans with disabilities to achieve the American dream, obviously we need to get political leaders to really deliver. There has been some wonderful changes in policies that we've seen through the passage of WIOA, the new bill, on these issues, and now it's going to the states, and every governor that was just elected will, by law, be required to have a new, quote-unquote, unified plan for how to deal with these employment issues for people with disabilities, while at the same time meeting the needs of employers for qualified talent that can really move our economy forward. So I think this is a win-win issue for employers, for taxpayers who would like to see a smaller burden of the disabilities benefit system, and most of all for people with disabilities who, as we saw in this poll, do have the economy and jobs as their number one top issue, even more so than voters overall. This issue is really will for us all. So I want to thank Dave Walker, I want to thank Whit, Ayres, and I want to thank Stan Greenberg. I really appreciate your solid work on this.
Okay, great.
It's
Thank
a pleasure.
you, Jennifer.
Folks, have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Gentlemen, this concludes today's Respectability webinar. Thank you all for attending.